I welcome you to our first all-village event, the Transplant Advisory Council, and our online presence, the Transplant Village, which is online. So welcome to our village. And today, I want to say it also represents the beginning of a year-long celebration. 50 years ago this spring, the first successful organ transplant took place here at Northwestern. But a little bit more on that later. My name is Dan Dickinson. I'm honored to chair the council. Like most of you in the room today, I had a liver transplant, and it was a significant impact on my family. In March of 2011, I received a liver, and like many of you, we are here today because of the care that we received at Northwestern. 18 months ago, our council was an idea. It was an idea that we carefully developed into a business model. And we had great cooperation with the Northwestern Memorial Foundation to do that. We are honored now. We have 25 active members participating on the board. Our board members are folks and families whose lives have been changed for the better because of the care that we've all received here at Northwestern. We have business people, we have judges, we have moms, we have dads, we have sons, we have daughters. Some of us are donors, most of us are recipients. I'd like to recognize our council. I think many of our 25 members are here today. If you could all stand up and identify yourself, and a round of applause. These folks have put in a lot of time, and if you get a chance, say thank you. They all have a little council member here down at the bottom. All of us, we have one thing in common. All of us, including most of us in this room, we belong to this very special club. It's a club that has just a few members, and it's a club that we never expected to join. And those outside our club have very little knowledge of what it's all about. All of us, we have a unique story. We have a secret handshake, and we probably understand life better than most after having a clear perspective after been through a transplant. With Transplant Village, we are accomplishing something that certainly has never been done before at Northwestern, but to the best of our knowledge, it hasn't been done at any other transplant center in the nation. For the very first time, we are bringing together transplant patients in a non-clinical environment. Over 5,000 patients have been through this center, and all are welcome to be part of our village. So one could say we're a very unique alumni club. We're a very special alumni club, and we've graduated from that club, and there's a zest for life. And there's a yearning and a desire to give back to the next transplant patient that's coming down the line. As I said, our council has 25 members. We operate under committees. We have our committee chairs. We have our communications. We have our event committee, education. We have patient support. Our council members met monthly for the first year, and early on, we decided to open up the organization to anybody that wanted to be part of it. We have far too much to give others, and others have far too much to give to us and to others. So there was no way that we were not going to be inclusive. Our gratitude can be multiplied by our numbers, and that's what we intend to do. Our mission is clear, and none of this would be possible without the help and support from the Northwestern Memorial Foundation. I would like to introduce to you Ann Murray. Ann, if you could raise your hand over there, and her team, and also Dave Sack, who is Vice President of the Northwestern Memorial Foundation. Thank you for all the work. We have a wonderful relationship, and we value this very important relationship. Without you, really, none of this would be possible. I'd also like to extend a special thanks to Caitlin Larkin, who's heading up our social media. Caitlin's back here. And also Shauna McCarthy. Where's Shauna? who, she's probably out still working, who put on this meeting and is working with us on the 50th anniversary celebration. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about our accomplishments in the last 18 months. Our 25 council members are dedicated to this mission, and all of us have a very intense desire, like many of you, to give back. We are all part of a special mission-driven organization and part of something that's bigger than ourselves. Our committee structure is strong, and we have dedicated leadership. Our communications committee has assured our communications platform is in place with our web portal and Facebook. Our patient support and education committee spearheaded and established the Patient Assistance Fund, and we've raised over $50,000 to help those patients who sometimes cannot even afford parking. They fall into a donut hole, or they have other extenuating circumstances that could preclude them from getting a transplant. Our committees are responsible for the patient outreach and help, and they help shepherd those pre-transplant patients by sharing our experience, and our group provides input to the CTC through our Patient Advisory Board when the CTC considers changing protocols. And our event committee is responsible for this and some upcoming events. As we've matured, we've adjusted our governance. We now have an executive committee that's responsible for the strategic direction of the council. And then we have our villages, and we count all of you as the villages that are in the audience today. You are part of our success. You are why we're here, and you're part of things going forward. Our goals and objectives for the next year, our executive committee met and established our priorities. Our plan is to build the village by communicating through pre- and post-transplant patients, our friends, our families. We will facilitate the mission through information to the community, education, and awareness. As we communicate this mission to the external audience, we will build a sustainable model for long-term philanthropic support. Our plan is to build a culture of philanthropy and a sustainable business model among hospital staff, among the council members, among the external audience, and the organ donation community. And we intend to become a resource that helps people through the transplant life-saving, life-changing, transformational event. I'd like to give you just a little bit of a short primer on research hospitals. As you know, Northwestern is a teaching hospital, a research hospital. It's a mission-driven institution. The institution is bigger than any one person. And there's a reason why Northwestern has more than a 60% market share. I'm a business guy, so I call it market share, in the transplant market here in Chicago. And there's a reason why Northwestern has the largest living kidney donor program in the world. And there's a reason why Northwestern has the best patient outcomes in the transplant community, why they're number one Illinois, and I think now number 6 nationally. Northwestern attracts the best and they attract the brightest because it affords these individuals the opportunity to practice medicine on the leading edge through research. The transplant surgeons here, the MDs, they're here because they want to be on the leading edge. They want to offer their patients the most innovative approaches that are available. And the transplant research efforts have provided great benefit to probably many, many of you people in the room. There's people in this room today who are among the first hepatitis C patients to have the disease eradicated from them. Hep C is a cause for 50% of the liver transplants, and you cure Hep C, which is doable now, and it leaves a lot more livers available for other uses. There are others here today that have eliminated the need for anti-rejection medication because of stem cell transplants. The list goes on and on. We could talk about that all evening. All of this is possible because Northwestern is a research institution and the patients in this room are the beneficiary to this structure. Northwestern has one of the best track records in the nation obtaining grant funding. And it's the funding that allows the research to take place. There's research grants through the NIH and others, and Northwestern is usually first in line for these research grants. But it all starts with private funding through philanthropic efforts, and it's for this reason one of our goals is to establish a sustainable philanthropic model so this university can keep on offering the best to their transplant patients going forward. As I mentioned today, we are starting our 50th anniversary celebrate, and we really have a lot to celebrate. The theme is Where Tomorrow Begins. Where Tomorrow Begins will include a month-long online campaign in April 2014 to coincide with the National Organ Donation Awareness Month. The campaign will raise funds for the Comprehensive Transplant Center's Patient Assistance Fund, as well as funding for innovative transplant-related research at Northwestern. We'll also encourage people to sign up as organ donors during that month. Northwestern Memorial will promote the campaign through its social media channels, Facebook, Twitter, and so on. And then our Transplant Village website will also be using our social media accounts. So how can you help? Well, we are looking for online ambassadors between now and April to help us publicize the campaign beyond Northwestern. These online ambassadors are going to be people who have an interest in transplant medicine, who are active on social media, or have an active blog or something with traffic, and that are interested in helping to raise funds and awareness for the CTC and Transplant Village. Now, any of you who can help with the online campaign are welcome. Even if you don't have a Facebook page and you think that Twitter might be for the birds, you can still help, especially since the average transplant patient is 62, and we all have kids and we all have people that know how to navigate this stuff. So it's time to delegate on down in your family. Ask your family members who are active on social media if they'd like to get involved. We'll send out a survey via email that you can forward to any of your kids or friends that might also be a good online ambassador. You can also participate in the email portion of the campaign. We can provide you with the content, and you can send out a few emails to your family and during April. And I believe we have the email addresses for most of you. If we don't, if you could leave your card at the table on your way out. A lot of people showed up that we didn't expect, which is a wonderful thing. It's great when you run out of chairs. But if you could leave your email there, or take your name tag, turn it over, and write your email on the back, and then leave it up there before you leave. You can, if you talk to the registration desk on the way out, or you can direct any questions to myself, Kristen, Lori, or Caitlin are here also. I'd like to talk a little bit about future events. On March 11th and June 10th, we'll have two other all-village events. These events will be mostly educational, as this one is, and they'll feature faculty who are involved in liver and kidney and regenerative medicine research. April 1st begins our campaign, Where Tomorrow Begins. And then there's a very special date, April 6th. April 6th is a Sunday brunch. We're planning for about 400 to 500 people. We'll have sponsors for this event. It's not a fundraiser, it's more of a friend-raiser, but the sponsorships will cover about half the cost. So the venue's in the suburbs, so we don't have to pay for the parking. So it'll be about $25 an event. We'd like to have about 400 or 500 people there. We have a very, very special keynote speaker, and the subject matter will be related to organ transplant research. And lastly, we have, how many swimmers here? We have a tentative date for the first annual Shark Fest swim in Lake Michigan in August, which is subject to city approval, but that'll be a mile-long swim, and I'm going to jump in first. So, you didn't come here to listen to me today. I am very fortunate to have the honor to introduce someone to you who is known well to all of you. He needs really no introduction because we know him so well, but deserves from us a hearty welcome and thank you for all he has done for us. Dr. Abecassis first arrived at Northwestern in 1992, later became Chief of Organ Transplant in 2003 for Northwestern's Comprehensive Transplant Center. And it's through his leadership that he has attracted a world-class team and is known among his peers as a leader of a very, very robust research program in one of the 5 top centers for sure in this country. So Dr. Abecassis, we welcome you and thank you for coming.
This is really amazing. A lot of you I haven't seen for some 10, 15 years. It's really wonderful to have you all here today. So I'm going to try to give you an overview of what we do here, other than put organs into people, which is kind of our day job. But as Dan mentioned, if we don't do research and advance the field, then we won't be able to help people the way that we want to help people. So I want to take you through a very fast, only because I don't have that much time, trip through some of the research efforts that are going on at Northwestern. And first, the Comprehensive Transplant Center was actually formulated in 2009 through a recognition by the institution that transplant was about a lot more than just a bunch of transplant surgeons and nephrologists and hepatologists taking care of patients, that it had to be more than that. And so we wrote a mission statement that rang true then and rings true now. And that is that we expect the Comprehensive Transplant Center to reach a pinnacle of academic excellence, so that the transplant program here is considered synonymous with not only best clinical practice, which is what we do for our patients, but high impact, innovative, basic translational clinical research, and also to create the most desirable teaching and training program in various areas of transplantation. And that's a lot. But that's our mission, and we're not backing down. It's always good to remember the past, and as Dan mentioned, we're going to be celebrating the 50th anniversary of the first successful kidney transplant at Northwestern, which was done in February 1964. Happened to be the second kidney transplant in the city. The first was done at Michael Reese 5 days earlier. Michael Reese didn't do any transplants after that, and in contrast, Northwestern took off and did about 30 transplants before the next center in Chicago started doing transplants. So Northwestern was really a pioneer in transplantation in Chicago. It wasn't even called Northwestern. It was a combination of Passive and Wellesley hospitals, and they got together with Northwestern University and decided that they needed to do this. And I have a picture here of John Bergen, who's the surgeon who did the first transplant, and in fact the first several transplants. And this was only 10 years after the first successful kidney transplant was done in the world in 1954. And the top left picture represents the identical twins, and it's hard to know who was the donor and who was the recipient. And in fact, the donor is still alive, and the recipient, I think, died a few years later. The operating room scene to the right is the actual operating room scene of the first kidney transplant at Northwestern. And you can't even start to talk about transplantation without mentioning two greats, two giants whose shoulders we really stand on. One is Joe Murray here. He is getting his Nobel Prize for doing the first successful kidney transplant in the world at the Brigham Women's in Boston in 1954, and Tom Starzl getting the Medal of Science from President Bush for doing the first liver transplant. And there's some contests about whether it was the first in the world or not. There's a very smart, good surgeon, good friend of mine, Sir Roy Kahn, who claims that he actually did the first one. It was probably hours from each other, but it was on the other side of the pond, as he likes to mention. So Tom Starzl was clearly the father of liver transplantation in the United States, and it shouldn't surprise us that he actually started out at Northwestern doing liver transplants on dogs before moving to Denver, where he did the first human liver transplant that was successful back in the mid-1960s. And that patient was a baby and is still alive and actually is a nurse today. So a lot of history at Northwestern. The research strategy and the Comprehensive Transplant Center rests on 4 pillars. And I'm going to go through these 4 today only because I think it's so cool that I just can't keep it to myself anymore. And these are the 4 pillars. One is immune tolerance, biomarker discovery, outcomes research, and tissue engineered organs. And for those of you that attended last night's evening, you heard Dr. Wertheim tell you about how he's going about building tissue engineered organs. And a lot of people were really amazed by that. I'm going to just show you a couple of slides on that for those of you that were not here last night. So first, immune tolerance. Immune tolerance was first described by Peter Medawar, Sir Peter Medawar, who got the Nobel Prize for this in 1960. And the guy that should have got the Nobel Prize was a guy named Ray Owen up in Madison, Wisconsin, who had discovered the concept of chimerism in his study of calves that shared a placenta. And he identified the fact that 2 immune systems could coexist without hurting each other, and he called it chimerism. And of course, the term chimerism was based on the chimera from Greek mythology. That was an animal that had a lion's head, a goat's body, and a snake as a tail, insinuating that 3 animals could coexist within one body. And so he said, well, if that's called chimera, then having 2 immune systems coexist in one patient is also called chimerism. And so he coined the term chimerism. Now, this was known as the Holy Grail in transplantation since 1950, when it was first discussed by Peter Medawar. And a lot of people talked about it, and a lot of animal studies were done, and it wasn't until very recently that it was started to be done in human beings. There was an initial experience at Harvard at the MGH, which kind of got the ball rolling, but then failed. There was another experience at Stanford, which was done for patients who were HLA identical, and then Northwestern got into the game within a couple of years of these experiences, and we are the first institution in the world to be able to do HLA disparate kidney transplants successfully with elimination of anti-rejection medication long-term. And this is a study that was is being led by Dr. Leventhal. There's another study led by Dr. Josh Miller, and this was an HLA identical patient. So we have 2 of the only successful protocols in the world that can achieve this. So I often say that it's hard to call something a holy grail when you can actually drink from it. And so we're drinking from that cup right now. In Dr. Leventhal's study, which was published in Science Translational Medicine about a year and a half ago, there are currently 18 of 19 patients who have developed chimerism. 12 of the 19 patients are either completely off medication or are weaning off medication, and every single patient that achieved chimerism is off medication or able to come off medication. A true first in human kidney transplantation in the world. In fact, a little company called Novartis bought the global license for this technology and is now funding completion of our phase 2 trials and a launch of phase 3 trials in the first quarter of 2004. And if that doesn't knock your socks off, then this will, because that study was done in living donor transplants where the stem cells from the donor were infused into the recipient. And what we are doing now, and we've just enrolled our second patient, is to delay tolerance. So hopefully down the road, any transplant patient can become tolerant even after the transplant, as long as we have donor material available. And so this would even apply to people that get transplants from deceased donors, because we would harvest the bone marrow from the deceased donor at the time that we take the organ. We would cryopreserve it. We would engineer it the way that we've engineered the cells to get us to where we are today. And once they're stable from their transplant, we would then induce tolerance and get them off anti-rejection medication for life. And that's the goal. We have a GMP facility, which is a very expensive proposition that allows us to do this work with FDA approval, that allows us to play around and engineer cells. And we have another protocol, which is called a regulatory T-cell protocol, that we are just applying to the FDA for what's called an IND, to be able to do this through a different method of inducing tolerance in patients that undergo transplantation. Science fiction 5 years ago. We also have been very busy with biomarker discovery and functional genomics, and that's a very fancy bunch of words for the ability to detect rejection with a blood test before rejection happens and be able to do something to prevent it before it happens. In fact, we've been able to do this because a lot of our patients have agreed to be part of a biorepository, so that whenever you come and see us, we take an extra tube of blood or maybe an extra couple of tubes of blood. If we do a biopsy, we ask you for permission to store some of it so we can do the kinds of genomic analyses and proteomic analyses. And as a result of all of this, we have been able to create a company a few months ago called Transplant Genomics Incorporated. The reason for creating a company is that this is the only way that we know to bring a test that we've developed in the laboratory to a patient, because there are hurdles to commercializing things that the NIH will not support. And so the only way to do this is to create a company that can do that. And we've just done that, and we're just finishing our first round of financing for about $10 million to be able to do the studies that are necessary to get these tests commercialized. Interestingly, most of the $10 million will come back to Northwestern to sponsor the research that is necessary to commercialize these tests. So this is another way that we have figured out to support the research that we are doing. Outcomes research is very important because until transplants were truly successful, the only way that we ever measure transplant is what percentage of patients are alive at a year and what percentage of organs are working at a year. And as transplant recipients, you don't want to hear that. You want to know that you're going to be alive and your organ's going to be working. And then the next question is, well, how are you going to be feeling? And how do we measure the quality of life following transplantation? And how do we do things to improve safety? And so we have a lot of people that are doing research on this at Northwestern under the umbrella of something called NUTORC, which stands for Research Collaborative that looks at outcomes. And this has been a huge success. We've gotten a whole bunch of funding through the standard NIH BCORI mechanisms. We have published almost 50 papers in the literature. We've been extremely active. And this is, I love this set of slides because it just tells you how active this group is. This is a bunch of people represented by dots, investigators, scientists, clinicians. And this shows the connection between these people starting in 2008. And black lines represent co-authorship in manuscripts. Green lines represent funding from sources like the NIH. And the dotted red line represents mentorship. And just watch this. This is 2008. 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012. So the activity is amazing. And the only reason that we can have this level of activity is that we've been able to secure the funding to be able to do this. And a lot of that funding comes from the NIH, but a lot of that funding also comes in through philanthropy. And I'll explain in a few minutes how these two are different. And finally, I'll talk about tissue-engineered organs. And again, Jason Wertheim gave a very nice review last night. We held our first Let's Build a Kidney Symposium here this year. We're having a Let's Build a Liver Symposium in the spring. We brought together experts from the entire world to do this, and we've taken the position that nobody's going to do this alone. We're going to do it together, so let's bring everybody together under the tent and collaborate and get it done. And so Jason published a very important paper that set the tone for this. He's been collaborating with people at MGH, at Wake Forest, at Pittsburgh, and people that are really moving this field forward. These are just examples, and I won't go into all of them, but this is what a kidney looks like when you strip it of all its cells down to its chassis, down to it's called the extracellular matrix. There isn't a single cell left in this kidney. This is a kidney that was basically treated with detergents to get rid of all the cells, and all that's left is the protein scaffold. Then what you do is you inject cells derived from the patient who needs a transplant. And these cells slowly populate. And then, this is in a rat, you basically transplant that kidney. And the idea here is that if we use your own cells to populate this protein scaffold, you will not need anti-rejection medication because these are your own cells and your body will not reject your own cells. And that is what we're doing now. We're doing this in mice and rats, and we're getting the technology down, so hopefully we can bring this to you in the next decade. Doing the same thing for livers. This is a rat liver, and it goes through a process of decellularization with a combination of detergents. This is what it looks like with a bunch of cells in it. This is what it looks like with no cells in it. It's almost translucent. You can see through it. It's just a bunch of protein scaffolding. And then this is what it looks like when we fill it with liver cells from a human. And the green means the cells are alive and well, and this is the bioreactor where we do this. And then we have a model. This is a rat liver, believe it or not. You can see a Q-tip just to show you how big this whole liver is. And we've taken, notice the difference in color, we've taken a piece of that liver out and replaced it with a graft. So we have a model where we can test these livers to see whether they work or not. And in fact, we see that they work. You can see that, you can see that if we check for albumin, and we check for all the enzymes, and we check through very complicated technologies of Western blotting, you can see that these livers are functioning just fine. We're not ready yet for prime time, but we've really defined the proof of principle that will allow us to get there with a lot more work and a lot more research. This is just to give you an idea of what it takes to support this kind of research. This is the activity of our microsurgery lab. We have 4 microvascular surgeons who do transplants on mice and rats all day long. They can do kidney transplants on mice. You need a microscope to see the suture material that is being used. All these transplants are done under microscopes. This is extremely expensive, and there's only a handful of people in the country that can do these. And you can see that we did 1,059 of these transplants in our microvascular lab this year. So how is this all funded? It's funded through grants, through all kinds of grants. And this is just to give you an idea, and I won't go into details. These are the grant proposals that we received in fiscal year 2013, and you can see that it totaled $30.5 million to get this thing going. And I won't go through all the details, but you can see there's a lot of grants, a lot of people getting these grants. And then these are the grants that we've submitted this year. This is fiscal year 2014. The pay line for the NIH now is less than 10%. That means that less than 10% of grants submitted to the NIH actually get funded. So for every 10 grants that we submit, less than one gets funded. So just because we submit all these grants does not guarantee that we're going to get funded. But the only way not to get funded for sure is not to submit a grant. And so we continue to submit these grants and hope for the best. And these are some of the grants that we've submitted. And you can see today at 5 o'clock, this grant went in that is looking at a competitive renewal for the meaningful use of these genomics. And this grant, if funded, will equal about $12 million in direct costs, which will translate into close to $20 million for us to advance the research that we're doing. That, of course, is assuming that we're in the 10% of people that get funded. And so if you look at the big picture and you say, well, how do you decide, where to invest money that you raise? Well, it's very simple. This is a 3x3 grid that I think is very simple and helps me think about where to make investments. If you look at the left here, it's low risk, moderate risk, and high risk. And what does risk mean? It means risk of actually being successful in the experiment that you're planning. So what would be something that's low risk? Establishing a biorepository. The risk is the patient will say, no, I'm not giving you my blood sample. That's not very risky. Most of our patients are more than happy to participate, knowing that we're advancing the field. What's high risk? Building artificial organs, right? I mean, that's not a done deal. That's going to take a lot of work and development. And then I look at short term, medium term, and long term. Short term being 1 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, and 10 plus years for long term. And this is how we invest. And the key thing to remember here is that the NIH will not fund anything below this red line. They will not fund high-risk research. They will fund research that they believe has an 80+% chance of being successful. So if you go to the NIH and you tell them, I want you to fund my research program, I'm going to build artificial livers and put them into people, they will refer us to a psychiatric. If you look at here, short-term, low-risk, moderate risk. Okay, so we're going to put together a biorepository. We're going to put together a data repository. There's no science in that. The NIH says, we're not interested. You figure it out. So in these 4 boxes is where the NIH funds stuff. So this is medium-term to long-term. And the only reason that you get to long-term, the only way you get to long-term is you get something funded for the medium term. These are 5-year grants. And then you're successful. And then you apply for a competitive renewal because you say, look what I've done. I've proven myself. Now give me more money so I can do the next logical step. And that's what the grant that we submitted today is. We got close to $20 million 4 years ago. We created the genomics, we created a company, and then we're coming back to the NIH and saying, we did it, we said we were going to do this, and we did it. Now you have to consider us for a competitive renewal. So that's what the long term means. But you have to start here, and you have to start in the high risk and move that up to the low risk and moderate risk in order to get to that NIH funding. And so who funds the high risk and this stuff here that the NIH doesn't fund? And the answer is philanthropy. And so what we use philanthropic funds for is as seed funding for work that we believe is going to be successful. We're willing to take a chance on it. But we can't convince the NIH to fund it. And so that's how I decide what our research portfolio is going to look like. And then it's not just me. We have a lot of people in this room that take care of you as doctors, but also think about how to advance the field and how do we move forward. And so we get together and decide how do we invest whatever money we have in the Comprehensive Transplant Center, but we tend to use this grid as a guide. And you can see here that this isn't just some imaginary grid. These are actual projects that are going on that populate the grid. We also are extremely cautious to not think that transplant science ends with us. we have to train the next generation. We have to keep training the best and the brightest to be able to carry on when we're no longer able to, or to help us carry on when we are able to. And so we have extremely robust training programs in transplantation surgery, in transplantation hepatology, in transplantation nephrology, in transplantation infectious diseases, and all of you have been cared for by these fellows through the years. And so it's very important in our tripartite mission to become the place where the brightest and best want to come and train. So we talked about the 50th anniversary, and this is really exciting. 50 years of transplantation at one institution. We just celebrated the 1,500th liver transplant at Northwestern. And I see patients here that were in that first dozen, patients that were in the second dozen, patients that were in the first 100, patients that were in the, and then somebody just asked me, what was my number? And I said, we stopped counting, I think, after a couple hundred. But patients know their number, especially patients that trusted us in the early days when we didn't have a track record and we didn't have a reputation. But we did have a reputation, and the reputation was Northwestern. And patients knew that Northwestern would not let them down. But it's been 50 years and a lot to, so one of the things that we're planning, which is very cool, is we were accepted by the American Association for the Advancement of Science, which is an incredibly prestigious organization, to present a symposium on Valentine's Day this coming year. And we're very fortunate to have, as one of the presenters, a good friend of mine, Al Roth, who just won the Nobel Prize in 2012 in economics. And guess what he won the Nobel Prize for? Does anybody know? He designed the mathematical model that will allow for kidney pair donation to occur at a national level in the United States. So here's an economist who decided that transplant had a problem that he could solve. And he won a Nobel Prize for that. And he will be here on Valentine's Day giving a talk at a meeting to continue to promote the idea that transplantation is something that requires ongoing research, whether it's immunology or economics. I think Dan has gone through this. I want to take a few minutes and acknowledge the Transplant Advisory Council. This group of very dedicated and committed people has worked very, very hard to make this happen and to make what is coming in the next few months happen. And they're all patients, and I think that their commitment and Dan's commitment, and I want to maybe take a second here and acknowledge Dan for his very strong work. And so that's it. I want to first thank you for coming tonight. Second, I want to thank you for the confidence that you've placed in our transplant program. And most importantly, I want to thank you for making what we do really seem worthwhile when we see a group of patients like this. So thank you very much for coming.